The kind I can't discuss in airport customs lines. A long silence fell over our section of the queue. The other passengers were looking between us like they were watching a tennis match, unsure who was winning but increasingly certain they were witnessing something significant. Maya squeezed my hand. "Mom, are you in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not in trouble." But everyone looks worried. They're not worried about me. What are they worried about? I looked at the faces around us, at the growing realization that maybe, possibly, they had made assumptions about someone they shouldn't have made assumptions about. "They're worried," I said quietly, "that they might have been wrong about something important." The silence stretched for another 30 seconds before the woman behind us cleared her throat. "Look, I'm sure you have a very interesting job, but that doesn't mean you can just claim diplomatic status whenever it's convenient." "I never claimed diplomatic status. You implied it. I answered your questions about my work." The businessman was scrolling through his phone again, but his movements were less casual now. More like someone trying to look busy while processing unexpected information. "Kyrgyzstan," he said without looking up. "That's near Afghanistan, right?" "Near enough." "And you go there for meetings?" "Among other places." Maya was watching this exchange with the intense focus of a child who understands that adult conversations sometimes carry weight beyond their words. She'd learned to read tension in voices, to recognize when her mother's calm tone meant something more serious than everyday patience. "What kind of meetings?" the woman pressed. "The kind that requires security clearances to discuss." Everyone says that when they want to sound important. I felt something shift in my chest, a familiar transition from patience to something cooler and more purposeful. It was the same feeling I got during briefings when someone questioned intelligence assessments without understanding the sources behind them. The feeling of being underestimated by people who had no framework for understanding what they were actually dealing with. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Everyone does say that." The woman looked triumphant. "Exactly." It's a classic deflection, which makes it very convenient when it happens to be true. Her smile faltered again. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that sometimes the reason people can't discuss their work isn't because they're trying to impress you. It's because they're legally prohibited from discussing classified operations with unauthorized personnel." The businessman looked up from his phone. "Classified operations? Mom," Maya said quietly, "should you be talking about this?" Smart girl. She was picking up on something the adults around us were still missing. The fact that I was saying more than I usually did about work, more than I was comfortable saying, which meant something had changed in the equation. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just clarifying some misunderstandings." The woman behind us was getting agitated now. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is getting ridiculous. You can't just start throwing around terms like classified operations and expect people to believe you're some kind of secret agent." "You're right. I can't expect you to believe anything." "So you admit you're making this up?" "I admit that your belief or disbelief has no impact on the reality of my security clearance." The college students were definitely recording now, not even trying to hide it anymore. The businessman had given up pretending to look at his phone and was openly staring. Behind us, I could hear whispered conversations as word spread through the line that something interesting was happening up front. Maya tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, people are taking pictures." "I know. Is that okay?" "It's fine." But it wasn't fine, not really. The last thing I needed was video of this conversation ending up on social media, especially not with Maya in frame. My work required a certain level of anonymity, a carefully maintained separation between my public life and my professional responsibilities. Standing in an airport customs line arguing about my credentials was exactly the kind of exposure I'd spent years learning to avoid. "You know what?" the woman said, her voice getting louder. "I'm tired of this nonsense. When we get to the front, I'm going to ask the customs agent to explain the diplomatic lane requirements. Then we'll see how classified your operations really are. That's your prerogative. And I bet they'll tell us exactly what I've been saying. That diplomatic lanes are for actual diplomats with actual credentials, not for people who watch too much television and think they can talk their way into VIP treatment." The businessman nodded. "She's got a point. If you really had the kind of clearances you're talking about, you'd have documentation to prove it." "What kind of documentation?" "Official ID, diplomatic passport, government orders." Something more substantial than stories about mysterious meetings in Central Asia. I could feel Maya's hand trembling slightly in mine. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just adult disagreement anymore. These people were actively challenging her mother's integrity, suggesting that everything I'd told her about my work was fantasy or lies. And they were doing it with the kind of confidence that comes from absolute certainty. "Maya," I said softly, "do you remember the time I had to leave for work in the middle of the night? When you woke up and I was already gone?" "The emergency." "That's right. Do you remember what I told you when I called from the airport? You said you couldn't tell me where you were going, but that you'd bring me something nice when you came back. And did I? The necklace with the blue stone." I touched the small pendant at my throat, a piece of Afghan lapis lazuli that had been a gift from a translator in Kabul. Maya loved the deep blue color, the way it caught light. To her, it was just a pretty necklace her mother had brought back from a business trip. To me, it was a reminder of a 3-day negotiation that had prevented a humanitarian crisis. "Where did I tell you the stone came from?" "A place where they make really beautiful things, but it's far away, and sometimes dangerous." The woman behind us was getting impatient. "This is adorable, but family stories don't constitute security clearances." "You're absolutely right, they don't." "So you agree that you've been exaggerating your importance." "I agree that family stories and security clearances are different things entirely." She looked satisfied. "Finally, some honesty." "The honesty is that I have both family stories and security clearances. They just happen to be related." The businessman laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, you can't seriously expect us to believe that you're running classified operations in Afghanistan." "I never said I was running anything in Afghanistan. You implied it." "I said I brought my daughter a necklace made from Afghan lapis lazuli. You drew your own conclusions about how I acquired it." The woman was shaking her head now. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Vague statements that could mean anything, designed to make people think you're more important than you actually are. What would convince you?" "Excuse me? I'm curious. What would it take for you to believe that I actually do the work I've described?" She gestured at my appearance again. "For starters, you'd need to look the part. Professional clothes, official documentation, some kind of security escort. Anything else? Recognition. If you were really as important as you're claiming, other people would know who you are. There would be protocols, procedures. You wouldn't just be standing in line like everyone else." I nodded thoughtfully. "Those are reasonable expectations. Thank you. They're also completely wrong for my line of work." The businessman was getting frustrated now. "Your line of work being what, exactly?" "Strategic intelligence coordination with multinational security partnerships." That's a lot of words that don't actually mean anything. They mean exactly what they say. Which is that I coordinate intelligence sharing between the United States and allied nations for strategic security purposes. The woman behind us made an exaggerated sound of disbelief. "Oh, please, you coordinate intelligence sharing? You're telling us you're some kind of spy?" "I'm telling you that I work in strategic intelligence coordination. Whether that makes me a spy depends on your definition of the term." Maya was looking up at me with wide eyes. This was more specific information about my work than she'd ever heard, and I could see her trying to process what it meant. The truth was, I'd always been deliberately vague about my job when talking to her. 10-year-olds didn't need to know that their mothers spent their days analyzing threat assessments and coordinating counterterrorism operations with foreign governments. "Mom," she said quietly, "are you really a spy?" The entire line went silent. Even the college students stopped whispering. Everyone was waiting for my answer, and I realized I'd painted myself into a corner. I couldn't lie to Maya, but I also couldn't give her the kind of detailed explanation that would satisfy the adults around us without compromising operational security. "I work for people who keep our country safe," I said finally. "Sometimes that work involves gathering information. Sometimes it involves sharing information with people from other countries who are trying to keep their countries safe too. But are you a spy?" "I'm your mom who happens to have a complicated job." The woman behind us was practically vibrating with frustration. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. Because you can't prove any of this. Because I don't need to prove anything to you." The businessman stepped closer. "Look, we've all been patient with this game. But enough is enough. You're clearly a nice person with an active imagination, but you're also teaching your daughter that it's okay to lie about important things. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Excuse me. You heard me. This whole performance, these vague claims about classified work and international operations, it's irresponsible. Kids believe what their parents tell them, and you're filling her head with fantasies about being some kind of secret agent. Maya's hand tightened in mine. My mom doesn't lie. I'm sure she doesn't mean to, honey, but sometimes adults exaggerate things to make themselves feel more important. I looked at him for a long moment, then at the woman behind us, then at the growing crowd of people who had gathered to watch our conversation. They were all so certain, so confident in their assessment of who I was and what I was capable of, so sure that appearance determined reality, that their limited understanding of how government work functioned was comprehensive enough to judge my claims. Maya, I said quietly, what's the most important rule I've taught you about telling the truth? That lies always catch up with you eventually. And what's the second most important rule? That some truths are private, and it's okay to keep private things private. Very good. Now, do you think I've been lying to these people? She looked around at the faces surrounding us, then back at me. No, I think you've been keeping private things private. And do you think that's okay? I think it's okay until someone calls you a liar. Smart girl. Smarter than the adults around us who thought they had everything figured out. What do you think I should do now? I think you should show them that you don't lie. I felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with something that might have been pride. Maya understood the situation better than anyone else in this line. She knew that her mother had been backed into a corner by people who refused to accept anything less than proof they weren't entitled to see. And she was telling me, in her 10-year-old way, that it was time to stop protecting their feelings and start protecting my integrity. Okay, I said. But remember, some private things have to stay private, even after we show people that we're telling the truth. I understand. I reached into my backpack, past the snacks and entertainment for Maya, past the travel documents and medications, to a zippered compartment that looked exactly like the kind of place someone might keep backup batteries or phone chargers. Inside was a leather folder that had been custom-made to look unremarkable, the kind of thing that would pass casual inspection without raising questions. The businessman was watching with obvious skepticism. Let me guess. Secret agent identification card? Something like that. I opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked, at first glance, like a standard government ID. Same size and general format as the ones carried by thousands of federal employees across dozens of agencies. But this one had specific features that were difficult to reproduce, security elements that were designed to be verified by people who knew what to look for. Department of Defense, the woman read over my shoulder. Strategic Operations Division. She paused. That could be fake. It could be. Probably is. That's a reasonable assumption. The businessman was squinting at the ID, trying to make out details. What's your clearance level? I flipped the document over, revealing a second page with classification markings that made him step back slightly. Higher than yours. That doesn't tell me anything. It tells you everything you need to know. Maya was trying to see the ID, but I kept it angled away from her. Some things were private, even from daughters. Especially daughters who were still learning how to keep secrets in a world where every conversation could end up online. The woman behind us was getting agitated again. Anyone can fake a government ID. That proves nothing. You're absolutely right. So why are you showing it to us? Because you asked for documentation. Real documentation. Define real. She gestured at the ID. Something that can be verified. Something official. I looked around the customs area, noting the positions of security cameras, the locations of federal agents, the proximity of airport police. Then I looked back at her. You want verification? Yes. Official verification? Yes. You understand that verification of classified credentials requires contact with federal security services? She hesitated. What does that mean? It means that if I request official verification of my clearance status, someone from the Department of Defense is going to have to confirm my identity and authorization level. The businessman was looking uncertain now. That seems excessive. It's not excessive. It's protocol. But for something like this, In an airport, over a disagreement about customs lanes? You asked for proof. I'm offering to provide it. The college students had stopped recording and were looking at each other with growing unease. The woman behind us was chewing her lip, clearly trying to figure out if she'd gotten in over her head. Look, she said finally, maybe we all got a little carried away. This doesn't need to become some kind of federal incident. It became a federal incident the moment you decided to publicly question my security clearance. I wasn't questioning your security clearance. I was questioning whether you had one. Same thing. The businessman was backing away now, literally taking steps to put distance between himself and our conversation. You know what? I think I'll just mind my own business from here on out. Too late for that. What do you mean? I looked toward the front of the customs line, where an agent had noticed the growing crowd around our section and was walking in our direction. He was young, probably new to the job, with the kind of eager alertness that suggested he was looking for opportunities to prove himself. It means, I said quietly, that airport security has noticed our discussion. And when airport security notices discussions about federal credentials and clearance levels, they're required to investigate. The woman went pale. Required by who? By the same people who issued my clearance. The customs agent reached us just as the line moved forward again, bringing us almost to the front of the queue. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing the kind of serious expression that federal employees practice in the mirror. Excuse me, he said, addressing the group in general. I couldn't help but notice some kind of disturbance over here. Is everything all right? The businessman immediately started backing away further. No disturbance. Just a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? The woman behind us was looking desperate now. Nothing important. Just a disagreement about travel procedures. Travel procedures? I stepped forward slightly, Maya's hand still in mine. These individuals have been questioning my authorization to use diplomatic customs channels. The agent's expression shifted, becoming more focused. Your authorization? They've expressed doubts about my security clearance and have requested official verification. I see. He looked around the group, taking in their suddenly anxious faces. And you are? I handed him my ID folder, the same one I'd shown to the other passengers. But his reaction was different. His eyes widened slightly as he read the classification markings, and his posture straightened in a way that suggested recognition. Ma'am, he said, his tone completely changed. I apologize for any inconvenience. Would you prefer to continue this conversation in a more private setting? The woman behind us made a small sound of distress. The businessman was actively trying to blend into the crowd now, but there wasn't anywhere to go in the confined space of the customs line. That won't be necessary, I said. These individuals simply wanted verification that my credentials are legitimate. I thought you might be able to provide that. The agent looked at the group again, then back at my ID. Ma'am, with respect, I'm not authorized to discuss your clearance level in a public setting. But you can confirm that my credentials are authentic? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And that I'm authorized to use expedited customs procedures when appropriate? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. That should address their concerns. The agent handed my ID back with something approaching reverence. Ma'am, if you'd like to proceed through the diplomatic channel, I can escort you personally. Maya squeezed my hand. Mom, what's happening? We're finishing our conversation with these nice people. The woman behind us was practically hyperventilating now. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. You didn't look like... Like what? Like someone with that kind of clearance. What does someone with that kind of clearance look like? She opened and closed her mouth several times without making a sound. The businessman had found his voice again, but it was much quieter now. We were just asking questions. Making conversation. No, I said calmly. You were making assumptions. And then you were teaching my daughter that her mother was a liar when those assumptions proved uncomfortable. We didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. You decided that I didn't belong in certain spaces, didn't deserve certain considerations, couldn't possibly have earned certain credentials. You made those decisions based on my appearance, my luggage, and your limited understanding of how the world actually works. The customs agent was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Ma'am, would you like me to file an incident report? That won't be necessary. But I would like to proceed through the appropriate channel now. Of course. Right this way. As we started to move toward the diplomatic lane, the woman behind us found her voice one more time. Wait. I just want to say I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I stopped and turned back to her. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. There's a difference. I know that now. Or are you just sorry that your assumptions were wrong? She looked confused. What's the difference? The difference is whether you learned something or whether you're just embarrassed. Maya was watching this exchange with the kind of intense attention she usually reserved for nature documentaries. I could see her processing the dynamics, understanding that this was about more than customs lanes and government IDs. What should I have learned? The woman asked. That judging people based on appearance is lazy thinking. That questioning someone's integrity requires more evidence than your personal comfort level. And that teaching children to dismiss their parents' accomplishments because they don't match your expectations is harmful in ways you probably haven't considered. The businessman stepped forward. For what it's worth, your daughter defended you really well. Yes, she did. Which tells you something about the kind of person she is, and the kind of family we are. Maya smiled up at me. Are we going to use the special line now? We are. Because you really do have permission? Because I really do have permission. As we walked away from the regular customs line toward the diplomatic channel, I could hear whispered conversations starting up behind us. People who had witnessed the confrontation were explaining to people who hadn't what they thought had just happened. The story would spread through the airport, probably end up on social media, possibly make it into someone's travel blog. But that was okay. Sometimes stories needed to be told, especially stories about the danger of assumptions and the importance of respecting people whose lives you don't understand. The diplomatic customs agent was a different breed entirely. Older, more experienced, with the kind of calm professionalism that comes from processing thousands of travelers with unusual credentials and complicated travel patterns. Good evening, he said as we approached. Traveling on official business? Returning from leave? Duration of absence? 10 days. Personal travel. He glanced at Maya, then back at me. Family vacation? Educational travel. London museums. Historical sites. Excellent choice. He processed our documents with efficient precision, checking my passport against databases I couldn't see, verifying information through channels I wouldn't discuss. Any items to declare? Nothing dutiable. Welcome home. Just like that, we were through. No additional questions. No suspicious looks. No suggestions that we didn't belong where we were. Professional courtesy extended to someone whose credentials were recognized and respected by people who understood what they represented. Maya was quiet as we walked toward baggage claim, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she looked up at me. Mom, why didn't you just show them your ID at the beginning? Because they didn't ask respectfully. They accused and assumed and demanded. That's not how you treat people, even when you're curious about their lives. But they were being mean to you. Yes, they were. Didn't that make you mad? I considered the question carefully. It made me disappointed. Mad would have been if they'd been mean to you. They were a little mean to me. They said I was wrong for thinking you were important. You weren't wrong. I know, but they didn't know. And that's their loss, not ours. She nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Can I ask you something? Always. Is your job really as exciting as they made it sound? I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had since we'd gotten in that customs line. Most of the time it's actually pretty boring. Lots of meetings and paperwork and conference calls. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They looked at my worn jeans, my daughter's excited chatter about her first international trip, and decided I was exactly the kind of person who didn't belong in the diplomatic lane. The customs agent's eyes lingered on my faded backpack, my scuffed sneakers, the way I kept checking my phone like I was nervous about something. When Maya bounced on her toes and asked if we could get ice cream after we cleared security, I saw him exchange a look with his supervisor. That look said everything. Single mom, probably scraped together enough money for this vacation, definitely trying to use connections she didn't have to skip the line. But what they didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, someone was going to walk through that checkpoint and change everything they thought they understood about who belonged where. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thing about traveling with a 10-year-old is that they notice everything. Maya had been watching the other passengers since we boarded at Heathrow, making observations that were both innocent and uncomfortably accurate. She pointed out the businessman who kept checking his Rolex, the elderly couple arguing in hushed tones about their connecting flight, the woman in first class who hadn't looked up from her laptop once during the entire 8-hour journey. But it was when we approached customs at Dulles that her commentary became a problem. "Mom, why is that line so much shorter?" she asked, tugging on my sleeve as we joined the queue marked, "All passports." She was looking at the diplomatic lane where maybe 6 people stood, instead of the 50+ in our line. "Can't we just go over there?" I knelt down to her eye level, keeping my voice low. "That line is for people with special jobs, sweetheart. We use this one." "What kind of special jobs?" "Diplomats. Government officials. People who travel for work." Maya processed this with the kind of serious concentration that always made me proud and nervous in equal measure. "But you travel for work." The woman behind us in line, clearly eavesdropping, let out a small snort. She was mid-40s, designer luggage, the kind of traveler who probably flew business class as a matter of principle. When I glanced back, she was already studying my appearance with obvious disapproval. Torn denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt, canvas backpack that had seen better years, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail because Maya had spilled orange juice on me during turbulence, and I'd spent the last hour of the flight cleaning it up instead of making myself presentable. "Some work is different than other work," I told Maya, hoping she'd drop the subject. She didn't. "But you said you help keep people safe. Isn't that important?" The designer luggage woman moved closer, not even pretending she wasn't listening now. A businessman in front of us turned around, his expression suggesting he was expecting entertainment. I could feel the familiar weight of judgment settling over us like a heavy coat. It was a feeling I knew well from school pickup lines, grocery stores, anywhere that single mothers with limited budgets intersected with people who had very clear ideas about how the world should work. "Maya, honey, let's just wait in our line, okay?" But Maya had inherited my stubborn streak along with my dark hair and brown eyes. "I'm just saying if there's a shorter line and you have an important job, maybe we should ask." "It doesn't work that way." "Why not?" the businessman chuckled. "Kid's got a point. What's the worst they could say?" "No?" I felt heat creep up my neck. "Because those lanes are for specific credentials, not for people like us." The words came out harsher than I intended, and I immediately regretted them. Not because they weren't true, but because Maya's face fell in that particular way that meant she was trying to figure out what she'd done wrong. The thing was, she hadn't done anything wrong. She was just being 10, asking questions, trying to understand a world that often didn't make sense even to adults. The designer luggage woman leaned forward. "Excuse me, but did you just say you work in security?" I turned around slowly. "Something like that." "What kind of security?" Her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be impressive. "Mall? Office building." The businessman was grinning now, like he'd stumbled onto reality television. Behind him, a couple of college-age travelers had stopped their conversation to listen. Maya was looking between me and the woman with growing confusion, trying to understand why a simple question had created so much tension. "I work for the government," I said simply. The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, which department?" "Defense." A pause. "Doing what, exactly?" I could have ended it there. Could have said something vague about administrative work or logistics coordination. Could have smiled politely and turned around, letting her imagination fill in the blanks with whatever story made her feel most comfortable. But something about her tone, the way she was talking to me like Maya couldn't hear every word, like my daughter needed to learn that her mother was exactly the kind of person who didn't deserve to ask questions about shorter lines. "Strategic operations," I said. The businessman laughed outright now. "Strategic operations, that sounds official." "It is official." "Sure it is." The woman's smile was sharp. "And I'm sure you'd love to use the diplomatic lane, but that's for actual diplomats. You know, people with real government positions." Maya was staring up at me now with wide eyes. At 10, she understood more than most people gave her credit for. She could hear the disbelief in the woman's voice, could sense the mockery even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. But she knew her mother was being challenged, and she knew she didn't like it. "My mom does have a real government position," Maya said, her voice small but determined. The woman smiled down at her with condescending sweetness. "I'm sure she does, honey. I'm sure she's very important." The line moved forward a few steps, and I found myself grateful for the distraction. But the conversation didn't end. If anything, the woman seemed energized by Maya's defense of me, like she'd found a new angle of attack. "It's just that the diplomatic lane is very exclusive," she continued, still addressing Maya but clearly performing for our growing audience. "It's for ambassadors and generals and people who need special security clearances. Not everyone can use it, even if they work for the government." "Why not?" Maya asked. "Because some jobs are more important than others." I felt something snap inside my chest. It was one thing to judge me, to look at my clothes and my backpack and decide I didn't belong in certain spaces. I was used to that. I had been dealing with it for years, ever since my divorce, ever since I'd started rebuilding my life with Maya as my only priority. But watching this woman explain to my daughter that some people mattered more than others, that importance could be measured by appearance and assumptions, that was a line I wasn't going to let her cross. "Maya," I said quietly, "why don't you get your book out? We're going to be here for a while." She nodded and dug through her small backpack, pulling out a dog-eared copy of something about dragons and friendship. But I could see her listening, still processing what the woman had said about importance and exclusivity and special clearances. The businessman was checking his phone now, probably texting someone about the drama in the customs line. The college students had their cameras out, not filming yet, but ready, like they were waiting for something more interesting to happen. The woman behind us was scrolling through her own phone, possibly looking up diplomatic lane requirements so she could cite them authoritatively. "You know," the businessman said, not looking up from his screen, "I actually looked it up once. The diplomatic lane. You need a diplomatic passport or official orders or some kind of federal credential. It's not just for anyone who says they work for the government." "I'm aware of the requirements," I said. "Are you?" The woman's voice was sweet again, dangerous. "Because I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself in front of your daughter. Or worse, get in trouble for trying to use lanes you're not authorized for." Maya looked up from her book. "What does authorized mean?" "It means having permission," I told her. "Do you have permission?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone within earshot was listening now, waiting to see how I'd answer. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in classifications and protocols that I couldn't explain in a customs line surrounded by strangers with cameras. The simple answer was yes, I had every authorization anyone could possibly need. But the simple answer would raise questions I wasn't prepared to deal with. "I have all the permissions I need," I said finally. The woman laughed. "Right, of course you do. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means people who actually have diplomatic credentials don't usually end up in the regular customs line wearing jeans and sneakers, carrying backpacks that look like they came from a garage sale." The businessman nodded appreciatively. "She's got a point." The few times I've seen actual officials, they're usually in suits. Professional appearance. You know, looking the part. I felt Maya's hand slip into mine. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just adults being silly. This was her mother being publicly questioned, dismissed, made to feel small in front of a growing audience of strangers. And there was nothing I could do about it without making everything worse. Maybe, I said slowly. You shouldn't make assumptions about people based on their clothes. Maybe, the woman replied. You shouldn't make claims about credentials you don't have. The line moved again, and I could see we were maybe 20 minutes away from the front. 20 more minutes of this performance, this public dissection of my right to exist in spaces where people like her felt comfortable. 20 more minutes of Maya listening to adults explain why her mother didn't belong, didn't matter, didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Tell you what, the businessman said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. When we get to the front, why don't you ask about the diplomatic lane? I'm sure the customs agents would be happy to explain the requirements. I'm sure they would, I agreed. And then maybe your daughter can see how these things actually work. You know, real-world education. Maya squeezed my hand tighter. Mom, I don't want to ask about the other line anymore. Why not, sweetheart? Because everyone's being mean about it. The woman behind us made a soft sound of disapproval. No one's being mean, honey. We're just explaining how things work. Sometimes adults have to learn that they can't always get what they want, just by asking. I closed my eyes for a moment, counting to 10 in 3 different languages. When I opened them, Maya was staring up at me with complete trust, waiting to see how I'd handle this situation, waiting to learn whether her mother was the kind of person who backed down when challenged, or the kind who stood her ground. You're right, I said to the woman. Adults do need to learn things sometimes. Exactly. And it's better to learn these lessons in front of family than in front of people who matter. The college students exchanged glances. One of them started recording, holding her phone casually but pointed in our direction. The businessman was grinning again, like he'd stumbled onto the best entertainment he'd had all week. Can I ask you something? I said to the woman. Of course. What do you do for work? She straightened, clearly pleased to be asked. I'm a senior marketing director for a pharmaceutical company. We handle international accounts, so I travel quite a bit. That's how I know about diplomatic protocols. Impressive. How long have you been doing that? 15 years. And before that? Business school. MBA from Northwestern. I nodded appreciatively. That's a significant investment in your career. You must be very good at what you do. She preened slightly. I like to think so. I bet you've worked hard to get where you are. Probably had to prove yourself more than once. Absolutely. It's a competitive field. So you understand what it's like when people make assumptions about your capabilities based on superficial things? Her smile faltered just slightly. I suppose. Good. Then you'll understand why I'm not particularly interested in proving anything to you. The businessman's grin faded. Hey, now. She was just trying to be helpful. Was she? Because from where I'm standing, it sounded like she was trying to make sure my daughter understood that her mother doesn't deserve to ask questions about airport procedures. That's not what I said, the woman protested. Isn't it? You've spent the last 15 minutes explaining to a 10-year-old why some people are more important than others, why appearance determines worthiness, why asking questions about shorter lines is somehow inappropriate for people like us. Maya was watching this exchange with fascination now, like she was seeing a different version of her mother. I didn't usually engage in public confrontations, didn't usually push back when people made assumptions, but there was something about doing it in front of Maya, about letting her see that her mother wasn't going to accept being diminished without a fight. That felt important. I was just pointing out reality, the woman said, her voice rising slightly. Whose reality? Everyone's reality. There are rules, protocols. You can't just ignore them because you want to. I never said anything about ignoring rules. You implied you could use the diplomatic lane. No, Maya asked a question about the diplomatic lane. I explained why we were using this one instead. And then you claimed to have credentials. I answered your questions about my work. The businessman stepped in again. Look, let's just agree that diplomatic lanes are for diplomats, okay? No harm, no foul. I looked at him for a long moment. What makes you think I'm not a diplomat? He laughed, but it sounded forced now. Come on. You're obviously a nice person, but let's be realistic here. What's realistic? You're traveling with your kid, wearing jeans, carrying a backpack. You look like every other soccer mom on this flight. And soccer moms can't be diplomats? That's not what I meant. What did you mean? He gestured vaguely at my appearance. You know, the whole package. Diplomats have a certain presentation. Describe that presentation. Professional, polished, official looking. I glanced down at my clothes, then back at him. And this isn't professional enough for you? It's fine for regular travel. But diplomatic work requires a different standard. According to who? According to common sense. Maya tugged on my hand. Mom, are you a diplomat? The question cut through all the adult posturing like a knife. Everyone fell silent, waiting for my answer. The woman behind us had her phone out now too, probably hoping to capture whatever happened next. The businessman was trying to look casual, while obviously listening for every word. I work in strategic operations for the Department of Defense, I told Maya. Sometimes that involves diplomatic functions. What's a diplomatic function? Meetings with people from other countries. Negotiations, treaties. Are you important? The woman behind us made another soft sound, like she was trying not to laugh. The businessman was shaking his head slightly, like he felt sorry for Maya having to hear her mother's delusions. Importance is relative, I said carefully. But do other people think you're important? I looked at the faces around us, at the mixture of amusement and pity and barely concealed mockery. Some people do. Some people don't. Why don't they? Because they don't know me. But if they knew you, they would? Maya, sweetheart. It doesn't really matter what other people think. But you said your job is to keep people safe. That sounds important. The woman behind us couldn't contain herself anymore. Honey, lots of people keep people safe. Security guards, police officers, firefighters. That doesn't make them diplomats. Maya turned around to look at her. Are you a diplomat? No, but I know what they look like. What do they look like? Well, they're usually older, more experienced looking. They wear suits and carry official briefcases and have security details. Maya considered this seriously. My mom doesn't have a security detail. Exactly. But maybe she doesn't need one because she's really good at keeping herself safe. I felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Maya was defending me with 10-year-old logic, but she was also innocently walking into a trap. Every word she said was giving these people more ammunition, more reasons to believe that both of us were delusional. That's sweet, the businessman said, but security details aren't about being good at self-defense. They're about protocol, about showing other people that you're important enough to warrant protection. Maybe my mom is so important that people already know not to mess with her, Maya said stubbornly. The woman laughed outright now. Oh, honey, I'm sure your mom is very special to you. But in the real world, important people have important-looking lives. What's an important-looking life? Nice clothes, expensive luggage, first-class tickets, official cars waiting for them at the airport. Maya looked around the customs area thoughtfully. I don't see any official cars. Because we're inside the airport. They wait outside. How do you know? Because I've seen it in movies. I almost smiled at that. The woman had just undermined her own authority by admitting her knowledge came from Hollywood. But Maya was too young to catch the irony. The line moved forward again, and I could see we were getting close to the front. Part of me was relieved that this conversation would soon be over. But another part was dreading the moment when we reached the customs agent. Because I knew exactly what was going to happen. These people were going to watch me present my regular passport, use the regular lane, and confirm every assumption they'd made about who I was and where I belonged, unless I chose to do something different. The thought came unbidden, along with a flutter of anxiety. I had other options. Other documents I could present, other lanes I could request. But using them would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer, especially not in front of Maya. My daughter knew I worked for the government, knew my job involved travel and meetings and keeping people safe. But She didn't know the full scope of what I did, didn't understand the clearances I held or the operations I oversaw, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. "Mom," Maya said quietly, "do you wish you had an important-looking life?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Like the lady said. Nice clothes and expensive stuff, and people waiting for you." I knelt down beside her again, ignoring the people around us who were still listening to every word. "Maya, do you think I need those things to be important?" She shook her head immediately. "No, you're the most important person I know." "Why?" "Because you take care of me, and you help other people, and you're really smart and brave." "Do you think I look like I'm smart and brave?" She studied my face seriously. "You look like my mom." "And that's enough?" "That's everything." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "You're right, it is everything." The woman behind us made an impatient sound. "That's very sweet, but we're going to be here all day if we don't keep moving." I stood up, Maya's hand still in mine. "You're right. We should keep moving." "Finally. But before we do, I want to ask you something." "What?" "When you get to the front of this line, when you present your passport and answer the agent's questions, what do you think they're going to see?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what story is your passport going to tell them? Where you've been? How often you travel? What kind of life you lead?" "I don't understand." "Your passport has stamps in it, right? Entry and exit marks from all the countries you visited for work?" "Of course." "How many countries would you say? In the last 5 years?" She thought about it. "Maybe 12? 15? That's impressive. A lot of international travel for pharmaceutical marketing. It's a global business." I nodded. "What about you?" I asked the businessman. "How much international travel?" "Not as much. Maybe 6 or 8 countries." "Business or pleasure?" "Mostly business. Some vacation." "And your passports reflect that history, right?" "Regular travel, standard entry procedures, normal tourist and business patterns?" They both nodded, still not understanding where this was going. "That's good," I said. "Predictable travel patterns make customs agents more comfortable. They can look at your documents and immediately understand what kind of traveler you are." "Right," the woman said slowly. "Maya," I said, "when we get to the front, the agent is going to look at my passport too, and it's going to tell a very different story than theirs." "What kind of story?" "The kind that explains why I don't usually use the regular customs line." The woman and businessman exchanged glances. Around us, several other passengers had stopped their own conversations to listen. The college students with the cameras were paying full attention now. "What's that supposed to mean?" the businessman asked. "It means my passport has a very specific kind of stamp pattern. The kind that raises flags if I don't use appropriate channels." "What kind of flags?" "The kind that result in phone calls to Washington." The woman's expression was shifting from amusement to uncertainty. "You're not serious." "Maya, do you remember when I was gone for 2 weeks last month?" "When you went to that meeting?" "That's right. Do you remember which country I went to?" "The one with the weird name. KYG. KYRG. Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, that one." I looked back at the adults. "How many pharmaceutical marketing conferences happen in Kyrgyzstan?" The woman's face had gone pale. "That doesn't prove anything." "No, it doesn't, but it's an interesting coincidence, don't you think?" The businessman was staring at me now with a completely different expression. "You're saying you travel to Central Asia for work?" "I'm saying I travel wherever my work requires me to go." "What kind of strategic operations require travel to Kyrgyzstan?" "But sometimes it's exciting. Sometimes it's important." "That's different than exciting. Can you tell me about the important parts?" "When you're older." "How much older?" "Old enough to understand that some information needs to stay private, even when people are being mean about it." "I understand that now." "I know you do. But understanding it and living with it are different things. When you're older, you'll be better at living with it." We collected our luggage and headed toward the exit, past the regular customs area where our former line mates were probably still processing their experience. I wondered if they'd learned anything useful, or if they just add this to their collection of travel stories without examining the assumptions that had created the situation in the first place. As we walked through the sliding doors into the arrivals area, Maya spotted something that made her stop short. "Mom, look!" I followed her gaze to a small group of people waiting near the exit. A man in a dark suit holding a sign with my name. Two others in similar attire standing at careful intervals, their positions chosen to observe multiple exit points while maintaining an appearance of casual waiting. My security detail. Standard protocol for returning from leave, especially when that leave involved international travel. I'd been expecting them, but had hoped to complete customs processing without Maya noticing their presence. "Who are those people?" she asked. "Colleagues." "Why are they holding a sign with your name?" "Because that's how you find people in crowded airports." "But you didn't tell me anyone was picking us up. I wanted it to be a surprise." She looked at me skeptically, her 10-year-old instincts sensing that there was more to the story. "Mom, are those people like the ones who were asking about diplomatic lanes?" "What do you mean? Are they the kind of people who know you're really important?" I knelt down beside her one more time, right there in the middle of the busy airport, with travelers rushing past us and my security detail watching from a respectful distance. "Maya, listen to me carefully. The most important thing about me isn't my job or my clearance or the people who know about my work. The most important thing about me is that I'm your mother. Do you understand that?" "Yes." "Good. Because no matter how complicated my work gets, no matter how many meetings I have to attend or how many countries I have to visit, being your mom is always going to be the job that matters most to me." She hugged me tightly. "I know, Mom. I've always known that." "How?" "Because you told me. Every day since I was little, you told me that being my mom was your favorite job." "And it is. Even when your other job is really important?" "Especially then." As we walked toward my security detail, I thought about the conversation in the customs line, about the assumptions people make, and the stories they tell themselves about who belongs where and why. Maya had learned something important today about defending the people she loves, about the difference between respectful curiosity and hostile judgment, about the complexity of adult lives that can't be understood from surface appearances. But more than that, she'd learned that her mother could handle whatever challenges came her way with grace and strength. That was worth more than any security clearance, more valuable than any professional recognition, more important than the opinions of strangers who thought they knew everything they needed to know about us from a single glance. The man with the sign approached us with professional courtesy. "Ma'am, I hope you had a pleasant trip." "Very pleasant, thank you." "Ready to head home?" "More than ready." As we walked toward the exit, Maya looked back one more time at the customs area. "Mom, do you think those people will remember this?" "I think they'll remember something. Whether they remember the right thing is up to them." "What's the right thing?" "That everyone has a story, and you can't know someone's story just by looking at them." "Will they tell other people about what happened?" "Probably." "Is that okay?" "It's okay as long as they tell it honestly." "What if they don't?" "Then that says more about them than it does about us." Outside, a black sedan was waiting in the pickup zone, its engine running quietly in the evening air. My detail moved with practiced efficiency, checking the area while maintaining the appearance of a normal airport pickup. To most observers, we probably look like any other family being collected by a car service. But Maya was starting to understand that appearances could be deceiving, that the ordinary often concealed the extraordinary, and that her mother's life was more complex than she'd ever imagined. As we settled into the back seat of the sedan, she leaned against my shoulder and closed her eyes. It had been a long day, a long flight, and a very long lesson in human nature. "Mom?" "Yes, I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to tell the truth, even when people didn't want to hear it." "Thank you, sweetheart." "And for being patient with people who were being mean. Sometimes patience is the strongest thing you can do." "Is that what you learned in your important job?" "No," I said, stroking her hair as the sedan pulled away from the curb. "That's what I learned from being your mother." The drive home took 45 minutes through evening traffic, Maya sleeping against my shoulder while I watched familiar landmarks pass by the window. The security detail maintained their professional silence, speaking only when necessary to coordinate our route or confirm arrival protocols. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes after tension has been resolved, and normal routines can resume. But my mind kept drifting back to the customs line, to the faces of those passengers when they realized their assumptions had been wrong. I wondered if they were still talking about it, still trying to process what had happened. I wondered if they'd learned anything useful, or if they'd simply file it away as an unusual travel story without examining the deeper implications. Maya stirred as we turned into our neighborhood, blinking awake as streetlights began flickering on in the gathering dusk. "Are we home?" "Almost." She sat up straighter, looking out the window at houses where lights were coming on and families were settling in for the evening. Normal people living normal lives, most of them blissfully unaware that their neighborhood was home to someone whose work took her to places they'd never heard of for reasons they'd never understand. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Back at the airport, when that lady said some jobs are more important than others, did that hurt your feelings?" I considered the question carefully. Maya had a gift for cutting straight to the emotional core of complicated situations, and she deserved an honest answer. "It hurt my feelings that she said it in front of you. Not because I was embarrassed about my work, but because I didn't want you to think that people's worth is determined by what other people think of their jobs." "I don't think that. I know you don't. But kids hear things, and sometimes they start to wonder if maybe the adults around them know something they don't." She was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Did you ever think they might be right? About you not looking important enough? Do you think I should have been worried about that?" "Number. I think you look exactly like you're supposed to look." "Which is how?" "Like my mom, who happens to have a really complicated job." I smiled, remembering my own words from earlier. That's a good way to put it. The sedan pulled into our driveway, and I could see our house waiting in the darkness, porch light on the way I'd left it 10 days earlier. Home. The place where I was just Maya's mother, where classified briefings and threat assessments and international coordination gave way to homework help and bedtime stories and the ordinary challenges of raising a child alone. The security detail performed their standard arrival protocol, checking the perimeter and confirming that the house was secure before allowing us to exit the vehicle. To Maya, it probably looked like excessive caution. To me, it was just another reminder that my two worlds, no matter how carefully I tried to separate them, would always intersect in ways that required vigilance. "Thank you," I told the team leader as he handed me our luggage. "Same time Monday?" "Yes, ma'am. The briefing is scheduled for 0800. Maya perked up at this. "You have to work on Monday?" "Just for a few hours. Catching up on what happened while we were gone." "Will you tell them about what happened at the airport?" "Probably not. It's not really relevant to my work." But that wasn't entirely true. What had happened at the airport was absolutely relevant to my work, just not in ways I could explain to Maya. The fact that I'd been publicly challenged about my credentials, that video of the confrontation might already be circulating online, that my face and voice were now associated with classified clearance levels in a very public forum, all of that would need to be reported and assessed. The security implications alone would require a full review. My cover status, my operational effectiveness, my ability to travel under civilian credentials, all of it would be evaluated by people whose job it was to calculate risk and determine whether I'd become a liability. But those were worries for Monday morning. Tonight was for unpacking and laundry and helping Maya readjust to being home after our first international trip together. As we settled into our evening routine, Maya seemed unusually thoughtful. She helped put away our travel clothes without being asked, organized her souvenirs from London with careful attention, and only asked twice if she could stay up past her normal bedtime. "You're being very mature tonight," I observed as she brushed her teeth. "I'm thinking about stuff." "What kind of stuff?" She rinsed and spit before answering. "About how people see things differently." "What do you mean?" "Like, those people at the airport saw you one way, but the customs man saw you a different way. And the people with the sign knew something else about you that nobody else knew." "That's true. So which way is the real way?" I leaned against the bathroom doorframe, struck by the sophistication of her question. "What do you think?" I think they're all real. I think you're different things to different people, but you're still the same person. Can you give me an example? Like, to me, you're my mom, who makes really good pancakes, and helps me with math homework, and reads stories in funny voices. To those people at the airport, you were someone they didn't understand. To your work people, you're someone who goes to important meetings and knows secret things. And those are all the same person? They're all you. Just different parts of you. I sat down on the edge of her bed as she climbed under the covers. That's a very wise observation. Is it hard? Being different things to different people? Sometimes. Especially when the different parts seem to contradict each other. What do you mean? Well, the part of me that's your mother wants to protect you from complicated things and keep you safe and happy. But the part of me that does classified work sometimes has to make decisions that take me away from you, or put me in situations that could be dangerous. Maya considered this seriously. But both parts are trying to keep people safe, right? Just different people in different ways. Yes, that's exactly right. So they're not really contradicting each other. They're just prioritizing different things at different times. I stared at her, amazed. Maya, that's one of the most insightful things I've ever heard anyone say about work-life balance. What's work-life balance? It's what adults call the challenge of being different things to different people without losing track of who you really are. Who are you really? I'm someone who believes that protecting the people I love is worth whatever complicated things I have to do to make that possible. She smiled. That sounds like both parts of you. It is both parts of me. As I kissed her goodnight and turned off the light, Maya had one more question. Mom, do you think those people at the airport learned anything today? I hope so. But even if they didn't, you learned something important. What did I learn? That you can trust your own judgment about the people you love. That you don't need other people's approval to know that someone is important to you. And that standing up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable, is always the right choice. Did you learn anything? I thought about it. I learned that my daughter is braver and smarter than I sometimes give her credit for. And that protecting your reputation is less important than protecting your integrity. What's the difference? Reputation is what other people think about you. Integrity is what you know to be true about yourself. Which one matters more? Integrity. Always integrity. Monday morning brought the inevitable reckoning. I arrived at the secure facility where I worked to find a message waiting from my supervisor requesting an immediate meeting. The tone was carefully neutral, but I knew what it meant. Someone had seen the airport video, and now there would be questions. The briefing room was smaller than usual, containing only my direct supervisor and someone from security services whose presence meant this was being taken seriously. They were polite but thorough, asking detailed questions about the confrontation, my decision-making process, and my assessment of any potential operational impact. The video has been viewed approximately 50,000 times since yesterday evening, the security officer informed me. Multiple social media platforms, several news aggregation sites, and at least 3 travel blogs have picked up the story. What's the narrative? Varies by platform. Some are framing it as airport drama, others as a lesson about judging people by appearance. A few are speculating about your actual clearance level and job responsibilities. My supervisor leaned forward. The concern isn't the public attention, obviously. The concern is whether this exposure affects your operational effectiveness. How do you mean? Your ability to travel under civilian cover, your anonymity in international settings, your effectiveness in situations where being recognized could compromise mission objectives. I nodded. These were legitimate concerns, the kind of risk assessment that needed to happen whenever an operative's identity became public in any context. What's your initial assessment? The video shows someone defending their credentials when challenged, but it doesn't reveal specific operational details or current assignments. My face is visible, but the quality isn't high enough for reliable facial recognition software. The name on my civilian documents isn't the one I use for classified travel. What about your daughter? She's clearly visible in the footage, which creates some security considerations for her. But she didn't reveal any operational information, and her presence actually reinforces the civilian cover narrative. The security officer made notes while I spoke. Are you requesting enhanced security protocols for your family? I'm requesting a full risk assessment, If you determine that enhanced protocols are necessary, I'll comply. But I don't want to change my daughter's life unless it's absolutely required. Understood. We'll have recommendations within 48 hours. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering contingency plans and communication protocols, and the possibility of temporary reassignment to non-travel positions. It was all routine, the kind of bureaucratic response that kicked in whenever the careful boundaries between public and classified worlds became blurred. But as I walked back to my office, I found myself thinking not about operational security or career implications, but about Maya's questions from the night before, about integrity versus reputation, about being different things to different people, about the courage required to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the airport video. Really sorry about how those people treated you. Hope you and your daughter are okay. Then another. Thank you for standing up to those bullies. My husband is military and we deal with this kind of assumption making all the time. And another. Your daughter is amazing. The way she defended you made me cry. You're obviously raising her right. By lunch, I'd received dozens of similar messages. People who had seen the video and felt compelled to reach out, to offer support or share their own experiences with judgment and assumptions, and the courage required to challenge both. Some of the messages were from military families who understood the complexity of serving while raising children. Others were from single mothers who recognized the particular challenges of being dismissed or underestimated in professional settings. A few were from federal employees who worked in classified environments and appreciated seeing someone navigate the tension between security requirements and public accountability. But the most meaningful message came from someone who had been in the customs line that day. I was standing about 10 people behind you when that confrontation happened. I didn't say anything at the time, but I wanted you to know that several of us were appalled by how those people treated you. I'm a teacher, and I know what it looks like when a parent is raising a thoughtful, confident child. Your daughter's defense of you was beautiful, and your handling of the situation was exactly the kind of grace under pressure I hope to teach my students. Thank you for the lesson in dignity. I read that message 3 times, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't realized was still unsettled. The validation mattered, not because I doubted my own actions, but because it confirmed that Maya had witnessed something worth witnessing. That the lesson she'd learned about integrity and courage was the lesson I'd hoped to teach her, even under difficult circumstances. That evening, Maya was full of questions about my day at work. Not the usual casual inquiries about whether I'd had meetings or made any interesting phone calls, but specific, thoughtful questions that showed she was still processing our airport experience. Did you tell your work people about what happened? I did. Were they mad? No, they weren't mad, but they wanted to make sure it didn't cause any problems for the work I do. Did it? We don't know yet, but probably not. Good. Because those people were wrong, and you were right. And it would be stupid if you got in trouble for being right. I laughed. That's one way to look at it. Mom, can I tell you something? Always. I was really proud of you at the airport. You told me that yesterday. I know, but I've been thinking about it more, and I want to tell you why. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table where she was working on homework. Okay, why? Because you could have just ignored them, or you could have gotten really mad and yelled at them, or you could have used your special ID right away to make them feel stupid. But I didn't do any of those things. Right. You tried to be patient and explain things nicely, but when they wouldn't listen and started being mean, you stood up for yourself in a way that was strong but not mean back. Is that important? I think it's the most important thing, because it showed me that you can be powerful without being a bully, and that you can defend yourself without hurting other people on purpose. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Those are good lessons. Are they lessons you learned in your important job? No, sweetheart. Those are lessons I learned from trying to be the kind of person I wanted you to see when you look at your mother. Well, it worked. Over the following days, the airport video continued to circulate, generating discussions about assumptions and judgment, and the complexity of modern security work. Editorial articles appeared in several publications, some focused on the dangers of making assumptions about people based on appearance, others examining the challenges faced by working mothers in professional environments. A few attempted to speculate about my actual job responsibilities, but without access to classified information, their conclusions remained safely vague. Most seemed to understand that the real story wasn't about secret agents or international intrigue, but about basic human respect and the courage required to demand it when it's not freely given. The security assessment concluded that my operational effectiveness had not been significantly compromised, though some additional protocols were recommended for Maya's protection. Nothing dramatic, just enhanced awareness of our surroundings and a few adjustments to our routine activities. But the most significant outcome was the conversation the incident generated within my own organization about the challenges faced by operatives who maintain civilian lives. Policy discussions about support systems for single parents, about operational security in an age of ubiquitous cameras, about the balance between mission requirements and family responsibilities, changes that might help the next person navigate the intersection of public life and classified work with a little more support and a little less risk. 3 weeks later, Maya came home from school with an assignment that made me smile. Her teacher had asked the class to write about a time when they'd learned something important about courage. Maya's essay was titled, "When My Mom Taught Me About Standing Up for What's Right." She wrote about the airport, about watching adults make assumptions about someone they didn't know, about learning that quiet strength was more powerful than loud arguments, and about understanding that protecting your integrity was worth temporary discomfort. But the conclusion was what made me proudest. I learned that courage isn't about not being scared or not caring what people think. Courage is about doing the right thing even when it's hard, and standing up for people you love even when other people don't understand why they deserve to be defended. My mom showed me that being brave doesn't mean being mean, and that you can be strong and kind at the same time. Her teacher added a note at the bottom. Maya's essay was so compelling that I asked her to read it to the class. Several students said it made them think differently about how they treat people they don't understand. "You're raising a remarkable young woman." That night, as I was tucking Maya into bed, she had one final question about our airport experience. "Mom, if the same thing happened again, would you do anything differently?" I thought about it carefully. I might try to move away from the situation earlier, before it escalated. I don't like confrontation, especially in front of you. But what if they wouldn't let you move away? What if they kept being mean, and you had to choose between standing up for yourself or letting them think you were lying? Then I'd make the same choice I made that day. Good. Because I need to know that you won't let people be mean to you just to avoid making them uncomfortable. Why is that important to you? Because someday I might be in a situation where people are being mean to me, and I want to remember that my mom taught me it's okay to stand up for myself even when it's scary. You're right, it is okay to stand up for yourself. And it's okay to stand up for other people too, right? Like if I see someone being treated the way those people treated you? Yes, but carefully. And safely. And always with the understanding that you can't control how other people behave, only how you respond to their behavior. I understand. Maya? Yeah? I hope you never have to use those lessons. But I'm glad you learned them. Me too, Mom. Me too. As the weeks passed, the airport incident faded from social media attention, replaced by newer controversies and fresher content. But its impact on our lives continued in quieter ways. Maya seemed more confident in social situations, more willing to ask questions when she didn't understand something, more comfortable standing up for herself and others when she witnessed unfairness. I found myself more conscious of the assumptions I made about strangers, more aware of the stories people might be carrying that weren't visible from the outside, more committed to treating service workers and fellow travelers with the kind of respect I wished everyone would extend as a matter of course. The security protocols became routine, barely noticeable additions to our normal activities. Maya adapted to them with the resilience children show when changes are explained honestly and implemented consistently. Her biggest complaint was that our grocery shopping took longer now, but she solved that problem by bringing a book to read, while additional security sweeps were conducted. My work continued as it always had, with international travel and classified briefings, and the constant balancing act between family responsibilities and national security requirements. But I carried with me a renewed appreciation for the privilege of doing work that mattered, and for the daughter who understood that importance without needing to know the details. 6 months later, we took another international trip, this time to visit Maya's grandmother in Ireland. As we approached customs at Dublin Airport, Maya looked at the various processing lanes and turned to me with a grin. "Mom, which line should we use?" What do you think? I think we should use whichever line you're supposed to use and not worry about what anyone else thinks about it. That sounds like a good plan. And if anyone gives us trouble, I'll tell them they should ask more questions before they make assumptions about people. That also sounds like a good plan. As we walked through the airport, I realized that the customs line confrontation had given us both something valuable. Maya had learned lessons about courage and integrity that would serve her throughout her life. I had been reminded that protecting my reputation was less important than protecting my principles, and that the example I set for my daughter would always matter more than the opinions of strangers. But most importantly, we had both learned that everyone has a story, and that those stories are always more complex than they appear from the outside. That the quiet person in line ahead of you might be carrying grief or responsibility or capability that you couldn't imagine. That the woman with the tired clothes and the chattering child might have just returned from briefings that could affect the safety of thousands of people. That judging people based on surface appearances is not just unkind, but actively dangerous, because it blinds us to the full humanity of the people around us. The world is full of hidden stories, of people whose lives intersect with ours briefly and without explanation. The customs officer processing hundreds of passengers each day, the security guard watching crowds of travelers, the cleaning staff working through the night to prepare facilities for the next day's operations. Each of them carrying their own complexities, their own challenges, their own forms of expertise and responsibility and quiet courage. The lesson Maya learned that day in the customs line wasn't really about her mother's security clearance or the diplomatic processing lanes or the assumptions people make about government work. The lesson was about seeing people fully, about extending respect before demanding proof of worthiness, about understanding that everyone you meet is carrying a story that deserves consideration and care. And that lesson, more than any classified briefing or international operation, would make the world a safer and more decent place for all of us to live in. As we settled into our seats for the flight to Dublin, Maya pulled out her journal and began writing. I didn't ask what she was working on, but I could see her glancing at the other passengers occasionally, studying their faces with thoughtful attention. Later, when she showed me what she'd written, I understood. She was practicing what she'd learned, creating stories for the people around us that honored their complexity, instead of reducing them to surface assumptions. The businessman in the suit might be traveling to visit a sick parent. The young woman with the backpack might be a graduate student conducting research that could change lives. The elderly couple arguing quietly might be navigating the stress of medical appointments in a foreign country. Each story was different, but all of them were generous. All of them assumed the best about people instead of the worst. All of them recognized that surface appearances rarely tell the full truth about human lives. Why do you think it's important to imagine good stories about people? I asked her. Because if I'm going to make up a story anyway, I might as well make up one that makes me kinder instead of meaner. That's very wise. Plus, if I assume good things about people, I'm more likely to treat them well. And if I treat them well, they're more likely to treat other people well. So it kind of spreads. Like what? Like kindness, like respect, like giving people chances to show you who they really are, instead of deciding who they are based on what they look like. As our plane lifted off into the evening sky, I thought about the ripple effects of that day in the customs line, the conversations it had started, the assumptions it had challenged, the lessons it had taught about the importance of seeing people fully and treating them accordingly. Maya fell asleep against my shoulder as we flew through the darkness toward Ireland, toward her grandmother who would spoil her with cookies and stories, and the kind of unconditional love that helps children understand their own worth. But she was already carrying something even more valuable than that love. She was carrying the knowledge that every person she would ever meet was worthy of respect, curiosity, and the benefit of the doubt. That everyone had a story worth hearing, even if they never chose to tell it. And that the way we treat people in moments of misunderstanding or conflict says more about who we are than it does about who they are. Those lessons, learned in an airport customs line from watching her mother navigate unfair assumptions with grace and strength, would serve Maya well in whatever life brought her way. And maybe, just maybe, they would help her make the world a little bit kinder for everyone else too. Years later, when Maya was preparing for college, she would tell this story to her friends as an example of why first impressions could be dangerously wrong. How a tired-looking woman in worn jeans had taught an entire airport about the difference between assumptions and reality. How sometimes the most important people in the room are the ones who don't need to announce their importance to anyone. She never revealed the specific details of her mother's work, never broke the trust that had been built through years of understanding that some truths were meant to stay within families. But she carried forward the larger lesson about treating strangers with curiosity instead of judgment, about asking respectful questions instead of making dismissive assumptions. The customs line incident became family legend, referenced whenever they encountered people who seemed too quick to categorize others based on surface appearances. It reminded them both that everyone carries hidden depths, that kindness costs nothing but pays dividends in ways you might never see, and that defending your integrity is always worth temporary discomfort. Maya grew up knowing that her mother had chosen a life of service that required sacrifice and discretion, but also knowing that this choice was made from strength, not weakness. That protecting others sometimes meant accepting misunderstanding from people who would never know the full story. And in a world that often seemed determined to divide people into categories of worthy and unworthy, important and insignificant, Maya learned to see individuals instead of assumptions, stories instead of stereotypes, and possibilities instead of limitations. The woman in the business suit might be struggling with loss. The teenager with the attitude might be dealing with challenges beyond their years. The quiet person in the corner might be carrying responsibilities that would humble everyone around them. These lessons, learned in an airport on an ordinary Tuesday, shaped how Maya would navigate every relationship and interaction for the rest of her life, teaching her that respect was something you gave freely, not something people had to earn through meeting your expectations of how important people should look or act. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected moments, delivered by people who never intended to teach anything at all. Sometimes wisdom arrives disguised as conflict, understanding emerges from misunderstanding, and the deepest truths are revealed when someone has the courage to stand firm in their integrity while extending grace to those who challenge it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.